Oh boy, okay, well, I've waited a long time to do this segment, so let's dive into it. Georgia beats Alabama. The Georgia Bulldogs are the national champions of college football. 33-18, the final score last night. I was on the field for this. It was an experience I'll certainly never forget. I really wish you guys could have had the vantage point that I have, unless you're a Bama fan. If you're a Georgia fan or just anyone else watching, I really wish you could have had the vantage point I had to be able to turn around and just look at the entire spectrum of emotion pouring out of people, both young and old. You had tears of joy. You had tears of all kind. You had so many different emotions pouring out of people, especially later in the game. So I'll get to that in just a second. But here's where I wanted to start. I was driving home last night. Yeah, by the way, I decided to drive home last night. I did my last post-game hit on the field at 1:48 a.m. I was in bed in Nashville at 5:45 a.m. Did not go to sleep because I had radio hits to do, so I haven't been to sleep yet. But had so much adrenaline after the game, just decided, whatever, I'm just going to go home. So I got home last night. I was not stuck on the road with the rest of you today. But here's what I was thinking about as I was driving home last night. Somewhere out there, between Dalton and Waycross, Georgia, there was some 13-year-old kid last night, and he was looking at his TV and he was saying, "Oh, finally." And to that kid, I want to be respectful, but I want to say, hush, and move to the side for just a second. Because again, with all due respect, this is not about you. This is about the much older gentleman or lady from your state who was old enough to vote in the 2000 election but cannot recall the last Georgia National Championship. There are some folks out there, I kid you not, who are old enough to remember watching the Challenger explosion on TV who do not remember and were not alive for the last Georgia National Championship. Last night, when I was watching this go down from field level, and then I turned and cast my gaze across that sea of humanity behind me, those were the people that were the most affected, especially by that Keely Ringo pick six, when what had been a possibility for decades turned into a reality. It turned into a certainty. You're going to win the national championship. So much emotion, incredible amounts of emotion. I've watched championships be won, but rarely do you watch one get one where the fan base has been so close so many times, in often cases against the same team, and they finally get it done. It was a sight to behold. Keep in mind, as recently as late November of last year, these are people, my home state. These are folks who legitimately believed the entire state was cursed from a sporting standpoint. And then the Braves won the World Series, and then the Georgia Bulldogs won a national championship a couple of months later, and it's got that Boston early 2000s kind of feel to it. Forget about the Falcons for a second. Just insert Georgia for the Falcons. You got the Red Sox and you got the Patriots, and all of a sudden they're just knocking down all of these fabled curses kind of happening in Georgia right now. Now, they did it in the plural in New England. Right now it's merely singular in the state of Georgia. We'll see what happens there. So many important things went down last night. Let's unpack this. First and foremost, the most important thing is Georgia won a national championship, and then you follow closely behind that with also Georgia finally beat Alabama, Kirby Smart finally beat Nick Saban, Georgia finally overcame Nick Saban. But here's to me the most important part, and I was thinking about this on my drive home. We don't have to ever find out what was down the other road. If you'll remember leading up to this, on this program, we talked about how I viewed this as a very much crossroads moment for the program that Kirby Smart's running at Georgia. And it was eerily similar to me to the crossroads that Mark Richt's Georgia program arrived at in 2012. SEC championship against the same Alabama team. It's funny how you keep running up against the same team in this conference. And Georgia came so close. And they almost punched a ticket to what would almost certainly be a national championship win over Notre Dame. They fell about 8 or 9 yards short, fell maybe one play short. They never got back again. And I know going into last night that you couldn't look at Kirby and Georgia and say, this is it, this is their last chance. No one would be that ignorant, I don't think. I certainly wasn't that ignorant, but I was of the mindset that you don't know how many more opportunities you're going to get, and you don't know if you'll ever have a better opportunity than this. And what would keep you up at night for years and years and years is if you couldn't mount a fourth quarter comeback. If you did turn it over on downs, if you did make the critical mistakes you've made before, and all of a sudden you're left wondering, what if? Alabama had all these injuries. Alabama is so young. We had a prime opportunity and we let it slip through our hands. Forget all that, because that's not a road we ever had to go down. You don't ever have to find out, if you're a Georgia fan, what was down that road. because everything they couldn't do once upon a time, they found a way to do last night. Overcame a lot of adversity. I was watching the replay, some of it, at least of this game out in the newsroom before we started the show. It's hard to remember because the second half kind of feels like a blur. This thing was 9-6 with under 4 minutes to go in the third quarter, and it ends up 33-18. And wow, all of a sudden, what used to be territory that Alabama owned in this matchup, that of course being the fourth quarter, becomes Georgia's. How about the stat here? It's my second padlock stat, but I'll go ahead and present it first. 20-9. That's how Georgia outscored Alabama in the fourth quarter. The previous 4 times these teams had played, Alabama 41-7 had outscored Georgia. So the first thing they did is they took ownership of the fourth quarter, but you remember in the weeks leading up to this thing and the weeks following the SEC championship game, this was all about yards per carry for Georgia. I never once beat the Stetson Bennett drum. I never talked about JT Daniels in any kind of serious manner. What I did say is I said, yeah, Georgia can win a title with Stetson Bennett, but it's all conditional. It's conditional on what you can do on the ground. And that's where this game was totally a tale of two halves. I texted a buddy after the first quarter had ended last night, and Alabama hadn't pulled away in the game by any stretch, but they had really settled in defensively. I texted a buddy and said, this feels like the fifth quarter of the SEC championship game. Second quarter feels like the sixth quarter of the SEC championship game. Georgia wasn't doing anything on the ground. And third quarter starts, and they're still not really doing much to write home about, and then all of a sudden it happens. You don't fill one gap. You got one high-level running back that makes one elite jump cut in a hole, and James Cook takes off down the right sideline, left sideline, depending on where you're looking, for about 67, 68 yards. That breaks the game open. Georgia doesn't pull away immediately. That's where things change totally. You want to know how much they changed? Georgia ended the game last night with 4.7 yards per carry. That's over a yard per carry better than they did in the SEC championship game. It's not a padlock stat per se. If you would have told me that number, I would think they got a much better chance to beat Alabama. But here's how big that James Cook run was. If I did nothing else but take the James Cook run away, here's how violently it swings the game. Georgia, with the big James Cook run, 4.7 yards per carry, if you take that run away, the rest of the game, they ran the ball for 2.5 yards per carry. That would be about a yard below their previous season low, and that previous season low had been against Alabama in the SEC championship game. But when you got the kind of defense Georgia has, you don't have to keep ripping off long run after long run, just like through the air. Stetson Bennett didn't have to light you up. Stetson Bennett didn't have to have some Joe Burrow, Trevor Lawrence, Bryce Young type of performance. He needed to drop it in there a couple of times. They needed to rip off a couple of runs, because that is called complementary football. And contrary to a growingly popular rumor out there, it can still win at the highest level. I think Georgia pretty much definitively proved that last night. But I'll tell you something else that's not a stat. It's not a padlock stat. I thought it was a padlock moment necessarily. Well, maybe not necessarily at the time. I thought it was very important, though. You remember in the first half, it looked like Georgia had forced a turnover and scored early in the game. And it got overturned, and Alabama ends up marching down the field, I think 14-play drive to open the game, and they kick a field goal. That right there is a 10-point swing in a game. But that's not what I want to focus on. The following drive, Georgia gets the ball. Stetson Bennett scrambles. He's not touched, but he fumbles the ball anyway, around the 30-yard line. He falls on it. Total bob play, total bounce of ball play. The ball, it was fortuitous that it stayed under him, and he fell on it, kind of like Bryce Young in the SEC championship game. Stetson's able to fall on it. They live to, I don't even remember if they punted it. What they didn't do is they didn't turn it over and give Alabama the ball in plus territory again. If they had done that, we don't know if Alabama starts that game 10-0. Georgia goes into a shell. Georgia changes their offensive approach to the game. And then all of a sudden, we're looking at a game that gets out of whack. We've seen those kinds of games happen at points this year. You never know what would have happened. Kind of like we're talking about with the game in and of itself. We don't have to find out what happened for Georgia down the path of losing because they won. We don't have to find out what's down the path of, well, what if they were down 10-0 early in the game? Because they didn't allow it to happen. But going back to the vantage point that I was able to have on this game, there was a feeling if you're a Georgia fan, you know all too well what I'm talking about, that even when they grabbed that lead, and man, what an answer it was when they did answer, even when they grabbed the lead late in this game, Bama's only down 8. Knowing you have to quite literally cut the head off the snake, no one's comfortable. No one's comfortable. No one's braggadocious. No one's anything other than white knuckle, bite the fingernails to the nubs level nervous watching Bryce Young try and drive that offense down the field one more time. But when Kelee Ringo pulled in that pick six and takes it all the way to the house, and all of a sudden, like I said, what was merely possibility for so long turns into certainty on one play, and it's such a quick turn of emotion, I just turned around. Kind of like I did in Knoxville earlier this year, but I turned around not to be pelted in the head with a bottle. This time, I turned around to just watch the faces, because I had a huge contingent of Georgia fans behind me, and to watch everybody from college-age students to 75-year-old couples there. You've got the entire spectrum of emotion pouring out. You got some folks who are so inebriated they won't even remember the moment, which I would argue devalues the ticket and devalues the experience. That's just me, though. You got other folks who are sober as a judge and will remember everything. The reactions kind of correlated with your level of inebriation. That was at least my vantage point. But to see some of the folks who you know have lived it. And a lot of times, if you're at those championship games, you're a season ticket holder. Oftentimes, you go on the road and you go to the road games. These folks have seen it all. If you just took the experiences that Georgia fans have had watching their team play Alabama and nothing else, and you watch all that emotion pour out, and you realize this thing that we thought was out of reach for so long, this belt that we climbed the ladder so many times and tried to grab, it's just out of our fingertips. We just grabbed it. We've got it. We're looking around. No one's going to take it from us. This is it. This is actually it. And you almost have to double take. But when you realize a national championship is yours, it's a really, really crazy thing. And it's crazy to watch a group simultaneously realize that. The Georgia sideline was the same way. I got to give Kirby Smart a ton of credit. I think I would have been outside my mind if I were him. First thing he did was pick Bryce Young up off the ground. I was watching some of the replay. It was right there, and Bryce Young gets picked up off the ground. Look, man, if I'm Kirby Smart, I probably would have Hulk Hogan style just ripped my shirt down the middle. That's how excited I would have been. I saw how high he got up off the ground. Don't think I didn't. I saw that. But it was really, really fun to watch that sideline. So critically important lessons here for the rest of college football. And I want so many programs to focus on this. One of the fundamental problems I have with the sport right now that I don't want to choose to focus on a lot tonight, but one of the fundamental problems I have with college football is that when things don't go your way as a program, administrators and high-level decision makers tend to want to knee-jerk, and they want to blame the system. We don't win more than 7 games, it's the system. Our coach doesn't pan out, it's the system. The system is rigged against us. The system is holding us down. Well, University of Georgia has gone longer than my entire lifetime without winning a national championship. So I'm pretty sure the system was not exactly built in their favor. If you don't believe me, ask them. What did Georgia do? How did they turn their fortune? Did they rub a magic 8-ball? No. What they did is they hired the right guy. They made a critical decision to hire the right guy. And then they also made the decision to invest. Georgia paid the cost. You want to be the boss? You want to pay the cost. They did it. And so you can either make fun of that, and you can laugh at these people for being all out of whack with their priorities, or you can say good for them. What you can't do is you can't go around constantly wanting to be all in and claim to be all in, but then look at what it takes to be all in and say, oh, I don't know if we can do that and that. Now this I'm okay with. You got to do it all. You got to check every box. For a long time, Georgia had some of the boxes checked and thought they had all of them checked. Kirby Smart walked in the door and came from the place where they had all the boxes checked. And he said, you think you're all in. You're not quite all in. You want me to do what they're doing over there? That's fine. I'll accept the challenge. There's no place I'd rather accept the challenge than my alma mater, in my home state. I grew up in Bainbridge. I'm the head coach at the University of Georgia right now. But if you want that to mean as much as it can mean, you got to give me what they have at Alabama. Georgia had not done that with Mark Richt. They did it with Kirby Smart. He didn't win a title overnight, but they stayed patient with him, and they returned and returned and returned the investment. Now he returned on the investment. Here's why last night was so important. Again, if you lose, you never know how many more times you're going to get there. But you win, and now all of a sudden it's like the Roger Bannister sub 4-minute mile. Till Roger Bannister ran a sub 4-minute mile, most people didn't believe it could happen. I didn't stop him. He just kept running. He kept training. Well, finally, Roger Bannister breaks that 4-minute barrier. Well, after that, hundreds of people broke it because all of a sudden they saw it could be done. What happens at the University of Georgia right now? What kind of transformation do you see with the football program? How many more kids are attracted to Georgia than already are because all of a sudden they've seen championships can happen there? It's not just a place you go where you win a bunch of games and there's a great town you live in. Championships can be won there. There's no longer a lock on the market of promising access to championships at Alabama. Now you get to promise it if you're at Georgia. That is one of the many benefits, obviously, of winning a championship. But one more thing that I want people to take notice of. Georgia wins a championship, but they don't do it with Trevor Lawrence. They don't do it with Joe Burrow. They don't do it with Bryce Young. They did it with Stetson Bennett. A lot of people, got a little volume over here on the computer, a lot of people were wrong about Stetson Bennett. I've said before on this show last year, I didn't think Georgia was going to be able to win a title with Stetson Bennett. I kind of softened on it a little bit this year. I didn't pick them to win the game. So obviously I still didn't think they were going to win. They did win. Again, they won in a complimentary fashion. So I want you to picture being at the University of Iowa or being at Michigan State or Virginia Tech. You're not at the pinnacle of the sport right now, but you've got some rich tradition of your own. You've got an established identity of your own. You watched this game last night. If Alabama wins it with Bryce Young, your tendency is probably to say, God, hats off to them. Like, when are we ever going to get a Bryce Young here? Alabama didn't win last night. The team that played rock-solid defense and played good enough at quarterback but played a very complimentary style won the game. If I'm at Iowa or Virginia Tech or Miami or Michigan State or wherever and I'm watching that last night, I'm saying, we may not be able to count on a Bryce Young. I think we could get a Stetson Bennett. I think we could play high-level defense. What it showed is that, again, contrary to that rumor going around, there is still more than just one way to skin the cat and win a national championship in this sport. You were told the days of having that kind of quarterback, I'm not going to say game manager because it's meant in a pejorative manner and it's not a negative, but you were told those days were gone. You were told the days of riding a high-level defensive effort to a national championship were gone. They're not gone. They're no more gone, as it turns out, than hiring a defensive-minded head coach. There were just a few years where we had the pendulum go all the way to one side of the sport. Well, Georgia just grabbed that thing and pulled it all the way back to the other side of the sport last night. In reality, it's always somewhere in between. The Georgia Bulldogs did a lot more last night for programs around college football than just for the program in the mirror. There are a lot of folks probably reinvigorated and energized and motivated and maybe even inspired by what Kirby Smart showed you can still do. Now, you can either do one of two things. You can look at it and say, well, yeah, but that's Georgia. Look at what all they have to work with. Or you can say, well, they didn't always have it. They had to press the button down there. They had to truly become all in. What stops us from pressing that button? Michigan State just paid Mel Tucker more than you ever thought they would pay Mel Tucker. What if Michigan State pressed the button? Miami just stepped up in such a big way to hire Mario Cristobal. What if Miami pressed the button? This stuff is not just on the table for 3 or 4 programs in America. Again, contrary to what people tell you, this sport is not constructed to only benefit 3 or 4 teams. The reality is there are about 1 or 2 dozen programs out there that realistically could achieve what Georgia achieved last night, could operate at that level. They've made very poor decisions in the past, but instead of looking in the mirror and saying, it's on us, we got to do better, like they did at Georgia, they look out the window and they tell you, excuse me, fan base, look, the system out there, the man out there out the window, that's who's holding us down. That's not who's holding you down. You're holding you down. Georgia was holding Georgia down. Not anymore. Who's going to be next? I think Georgia inspired a lot of people last night. Congratulations. Obviously, plenty more to talk about with the University of Georgia.